Welcome to the Austin Method, where we help you develop the skills of square dancing. Square dancing as a topic is big. This program is divided into the individual videos covering the calls, and then there are the general information videos. This video is part of the general information videos. You can think of them as reference material. Don't think of them as prerequisites. Some of them are longer and you're wanting to dance, so you may not want to watch from beginning to end. If you've got time, it's well worth the watch, but if you're in a hurry, go ahead and move on to learning the calls. There are two videos I would think of as prerequisites. That's the learning and practice video. That gives you tips and tricks and helps you organize your learning. It'll give you the most efficient way to maximize your learning of the skills of square dancing. The second one, it's the site walkthrough, and it'll show you how to navigate this website, how to find the pieces and parts you may be looking for. Those two are prerequisites. Otherwise, if you want to move on to the skills of square dancing, go ahead. But if you got the time, this is some great material. If you don't, make sure you come back as you get further into it. Come back to these materials and go over them. Even if you go through them at the beginning, come back to them, because as you gain vocabulary, you will get more from it in a second viewing as you get further along. So without any further ado, let's get to the video. All right, we've got some general tips for square dancing. The first one is boys and girls. So in square dancing, we use identifiers. You'll be known by many identifiers. You'll be a center, you'll be an end, you'll be a leader, you'll be a trailer. But the most common one you're going to hear is boys and girls. The thing to know about boys and girls is it has nothing to do with the gender of the dancers. It has nothing to do with insulting anyone or lack of respect. We use boys and girls because they're one syllable, they're different from each other. You know, you can't use male and female because the male part jumps out. You can't use men and women because men, women, men, women. The clearest definer we have between the two dancers, dancing boy and dancing girl, is boy and girl. So don't read too much into that one. Eye contact. There's nothing down at your feet that needs to be looked at. There's nothing going on down there. One of the main places we communicate through is through eye contact. Eye contact tells us, I see you, you're my opposite, we might be about to do something, I'm ready, are you ready? It's one of the things we use to communicate in square dancing. So make sure you're making eye contact with folks, and you'll see when they're lost or they're about to be lost, and it gives you a chance to help them out. Hand holding. We hold hands a lot in square dancing. In fact, every time you're standing next to somebody, you should be holding hands. It is our primary method of communication, is through the hands. And if you're not doing it, you're messing things up. Deal with it. Speaking to the boys here, girls never seem to have much trouble with this, but the boys just don't like to hold hands with boys. Thinking you're going to square dance without holding hands is like thinking you're going to go swimming without getting wet. Once you realize how important it is, the boys don't typically have a problem with it, but initially it's always, they're freaked out. It's extremely important. It's how you do good dancing. Without handholds, dancing becomes extremely loose and difficult and breaks down way more. So that's why we do it. It's our primary form of communication. I already talked about that. It gives us our square awareness. It tells us where we are in the square, who's next to us. It confirms through the strength of the handhold that people know that they're there. And by strength, I don't mean crushing at all, but you can read somebody's thoughts in how tentative or non-tentative they hold your hand. If they're sure they should be there, it has a certain feel. If they're questioning whether they should be there, it has a different feel. So hand holding is very important. It also helps us recognize our formations. A line is certainly much more of a line when all the pieces are connected. It may not look like a line if people are just standing around loosely without connecting through handholds. It's also how we help each other. I spoke about eye contact and knowing when somebody was lost or about to get lost. Well, the handhold and the leading and following is how we help each other. Grips and frame. Your grip should always, always, always be soft. It is not a matter of trying to prove how strong or macho you are. It's a matter of making contact and communicating. Frame. We have a video on handholds and frame, and I highly recommend you watch it. This is just kind of to put it in context with the other general tips. So frame is how we help each other. It's how the grip connects to communication, because just having a grip in a loose arm isn't very useful. All the steps of square dancing is the glide. It's not really a shuffle. A shuffle is a little different, but it's similar to a shuffle. You want to not be lifting your feet like a march or a step and putting your heel down first. You want to be gliding on the balls of your feet across the floor, one step per beat of the dance. Keep your steps small. You don't need to be covering the whole floor. Most of the calls are in close proximation. You want to make small steps. It's a brushing step, and there's nothing down there but mistakes, so don't look at your feet. Choreography and flow. So the caller will build into the choreography flow, which means that if he has you moving to the right, the next call is probably going to continue that movement around to the right. If you feel like you're moving counterclockwise, the next call is going to feel natural in the counterclockwise, or at least a neutral direction. Always go forward with the flow, and you'll be right about 90% of the time. Very rarely are you going to just stop and back up. So go with the flow. Keep moving. The choreography was written to keep you flowing in the direction you're going in, or at least to a neutral or from a neutral to a direction, but very rarely will you have to stop and go against your body flow. No choreography is perfect, so occasionally the caller will call something that actually goes against the flow, and yes, you do have to do it even if the flow isn't good. Don't tell him I told you couldn't do it that way. The hardest thing to do in square dancing sometimes is to do nothing. I've mentioned identifiers. Sometimes you're the end of the line, sometimes you're the center, sometimes you're a leader, sometimes you're a trailer, sometimes you're one of the active couples, sometimes you're not. One of the hardest things to do in square dancing is to not be the active dancers, is to do nothing. And if you're doing nothing, do nothing. Don't fidget, don't turn around, don't change the wall you're looking at, or hedge your bet and look at a corner of the room instead of a wall. Practice doing nothing when you're supposed to do nothing. Be precise when you dance. If you want to dance better, be precise. Like I said, don't look at the corners of the room, don't hedge your bets. Have one foot in towards the center of the square when it shouldn't be. Don't try to outguess the caller or anticipate the calls. Be precise and do exactly what needs to be done to get from one position to the other. Practicing precision will make you a better dancer. Squares in the name means we are always facing a wall. One wall or another. It's very, 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 very rare that you're not facing a wall. The circular Sicilian circles stuff is an exception. And then there's some special fancy stuff a caller might do, but it's not a normal part of square dancing. You should almost always, 99% of the time, be facing one wall or another. Fractions. Okay, going to talk about fractions. Callers will break the calls into fractions or tell you to do something fractionally. That almost always, yes, always comes as a quarter, half, or 3/4. Quarter's pretty easy. Somebody tells you to turn a quarter to the right, you got that. Somebody tells you to turn all the way around, halfway, that's pretty easy. Where people seem to struggle is with 3/4. Because what happens is you lose track. Where did I start? Where do I need to end? So there are two things that can help with that. One is noting before you ever leave what wall you should be looking at. Doesn't work great. Another trick that some people will try to use, and I find it doesn't work very well, is they'll say count walls. So if the caller says do something 3/4, they say count 3 walls. Well, the problem is people often forget that the wall they're looking at is 0, not 1. Or they'll forget to start calling until they're into the call, and then they're like, where am I? Am I at wall 2 or wall 1, or where am I? Where do I go? How do I stop? The actual easiest way I've found is to go a half and then a quarter more. Most people can do a half. Most people can recognize a quarter. The half is easy. It's the wall behind you. Quarter more is easy. 3/4 is a half and a quarter. It's just a little tip to help you to go through the fractions and know we're not going to go metric. Think about the results. I just kind of mentioned that with the fractions. If you recognize where you're going before you leave, sometimes it makes it easier to know how to get there and where you're going, because everybody's moving at once. So while you're moving, if you're thinking about where you need to go and nobody's where they were anymore, it can be a little confusing. So before you take that first step, in that millisecond before you step off, think about where it is you're going to end up at the end of that call and aim for that spot. Move with intention. So don't wander, don't dilly-dally. When you have that spot, when you know where you're going, move to the beat of the music, take the number of steps you need to be and get there and stop. No wandering. Definitions and bad habits. All calls have an official definition. You don't have to memorize them. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. Sometimes they're written very technically, and sometimes they're very straightforward. You should always look at the definitions. You should always try to understand the basic definition. But what we're trying to warn about here is shortcuts. Sometimes your friends, experienced square dancers, sometimes even a well-meaning caller will say, well, you just need to do this. And yeah, that works for that particular situation, but the definition is broader, and when you're put in a different situation and you don't know the definition, you don't know what to do. So trying to learn through shortcuts of the definitions isn't necessarily the best thing to do. So try to recognize when somebody is, if they say, well, it's just like, or just do this, be suspicious that they might be giving you a shortcut, because if it's just like that, then why do we have a separate definition? There's probably something that's slightly different. Bad habits. So sometimes when we learn these shortcuts, or even when we create these shortcuts, we start doing things because, well, we know where that's going to end. We'll just go there. And that can become a bad habit. And if a caller calls something for that call that counts on the definition, and you're doing something totally different because you think you know where it's going, it's not going to work out. I could give some examples, but, well, I will give some examples. I will give an example, and it may or may not be meaningful to you depending on whether you've covered these calls before, but half sachet and roll away. They end up in the same place, but they get there a different way. Roll away, the dancer folds in front of the other dancer and then rolls onto the other side. Half sachet, both dancers stay facing the same way, and they trade places with the right-hand dancer going in front of the left-hand dancer. If the caller calls half of a half sachet, and you're supposed to stop in front of the one dancer in front of the other, but you're doing a rollaway, and you only do half a rollaway, now you're facing instead of tandem with one dancer in front of the other. So these bad habits can compound later when the calls get a little more complicated. Thank you for visiting the Austin Method. We hope to see you on the dance floor soon.